Hello, this is Faith, your Catholic unschooling coach. I don't know, that's probably a pretty silly name for this channel, but anyway, I'm trying to recreate the video that I deleted. Couldn't get it uploaded properly. I'm going to see if I can upload this one. I'm still experimenting. I've had another channel since last November. And it's pretty easy to upload. That didn't take me long to figure out, and I am not savvy in tech stuff. But the second channel, it's weird. You can't upload things the same way. I don't understand how it works. Anyway, I sort of lost my mojo for talking about this particular thing, but I'm going to try again. I'm going to try and recapture it. It's about 9:45 in the evening after a very long day. But so what I wanted to say was, first of all, I would like this channel to be interactive. So thank you to my 5 subscribers. And what I'd like to do is, if you have questions, you can ask me, and then I will make a video and answer them. And the other thing I wanted to do was to just talk about how I figured out unschooling. It was a real long journey with lots of stops and starts, lots of insecurity about it, and then lots of moments where I would think, wow, this really works. It's very gratifying in the long run. Oops, sorry, I mean to knock you. Anyway, what inspired this particular video was this book, because I am taking care of a 4-year-old right now. And, because of COVID, the libraries had closed. But what they did here is you could call up the library and say, I would like some books for a 4-year-old boy. And they would say, well, what kind of books does he like? And I said, well, he likes funny books with animals. And so they gave us a bag of books. And some of them weren't so funny. I do think modern children's books tend to be zany in kind of a weird and slightly inappropriate way. There's a lot there's a lot of twaddle out there, but this one is not twaddle. This is Interrupting Chicken and the Elephant of Surprise. And I think I've read Interrupting Chicken, or at least I've heard of it, but this was just given in the bag of books that the librarian selected for us, and it has been a hit. The 4-year-old loves it, and there's so many things in here, rich things that you could mine. And one of the beautiful things about reading aloud and making that the basis for your homeschool is that it inspires deep conversations. You can really have these long dialogues and really sort of meaty conversations where you're really thinking things out, and your child can ask you questions, and you can go and research and explore together, and you can delight together in the same book. And so we've really been enjoying this book a lot. I've read it to him several times. It's his favorite out of the whole bunch. But there's so many things that you could draw from this and sort of make into sort of, what educators in the brick and mortar school would consider, worthy of education. And I think that the premise for this type of thing came to me as an early homeschooler when I think it was the first year I was homeschooling. It was my oldest son, who was 5, and we knew he was ADHD and dyslexic. He still didn't know his letters and that sort of thing. And a curriculum that had been recommended to me was 5 in a row. I think it's still around. I'm an old timer, so the curriculum I talk about might be outdated, but 5 in a row was this program, really sweet program, where they would pick out a classic children's book, and what you're supposed to do is read it 5 days in a row, and each day you would pull something different out of the book. So I remember the first book was the story about Ping, and we sat down, we started reading it, and Sping gets spanked. And when that happened, my son said, no, I don't want to listen to this book anymore. And that was it. I mean, the whole homeschooling thing was based on the fact that you were going to be able to read this book over and over again. You just out and out rejected the book. And that was the way homeschooling went for me. Like, I turned to unschooling. I mean, I didn't really turn to it because I'd been introduced to it initially, and had been attracted to it. But I kept having to revert to unschooling. That was my default because curriculum just didn't work for my kids, especially when they were young. When they got older and they wanted to learn something and they wanted to apply themselves and they could go to a class at co-op or at the community college, then it worked. But it didn't work very well at home at all. Anyway, when I was reading this book, it made me realize how much you could pull out of it, just like in that 5 in a row, only this time it wouldn't be based on somebody's, somebody who'd already decided that this is a classic book that you should read to your child. It's your child responding to a particular book, right? And then using that to, extrapolate lessons. Anyway, it's a really cute book. Interacting Chicken and the Elephant of Surprise. And of course, there's a joke in the title. It's really supposed to be Element of Surprise. So this little chicken comes home from school and says, "Teacher taught us about the element of surprise in stories." But she got it wrong, and she heard elephant of surprise. And so her father's trying to explain it to her. He says, no, it's the element of surprise. And she said, "What's that?" And he says, "Well, it's the part of the story that makes you say, 'Whoa, I didn't know that was going to happen,'" right? But I thought element is a word that kids really don't know. That's a really good word to learn. So I thought that was a good vocabulary word. And it's a word that in English has a lot of different connotations, I think. So I think you could go down a little bit of a rabbit trail and go look this book up. The word up. And then think about different ways you might use it. And one of the rabbit trails you could go on is maybe the elements, studying the periodic table, or at least learning that there's something called a periodic table. If your kid's a little bit older, my guy's only 4, but if you're reading this to a 6-year-old or something, you might be able to just talk about, there's things, the earth is made up of elements and they have a way of organizing. You could go off on a tangent in that way. But also, element and elephant, that's really kind of a pun, right? And so learning about puns is a fun thing, too. And there are these jokes. I've heard them on like some kind of British game show or something. There must be a name to them, where you make up a big story and the end of the story ends with a saying, like a proverb or something, but it's a play on words. It's like this, elephant of surprise instead of element of surprise. Have you heard of those? What are they called? I don't know. Anyway, but just learning about puns, teaches you about language. So making up puns together would be a fun thing to do. And then she has to read 3 stories. Oh, my aquarium light just went off. She has to read 3 stories for her homework and find the element of surprise in each story. So her dad starts to read to her. He reads her The Ugly Duckling and Rapunzel and The Little Mermaid. So I thought, well, you know what? You could go off on a tangent where you just start reading fairy tales and trying to find the element or the elephant of surprise in other fairy tales too. So that could be a tangent you could go off on. If you have older children, a really fun exercise with fairy tales that they know well is to see if they'll write them down, but they can only use, say, 100 words, or they can only use 50 words to tell the story. And that's kind of a fun exercise because they have to figure out what's the most important point of the story, what are the details you can leave out, what's the actual plot, like what's the skeleton of the plot. So that's a good exercise to do, but that's for older kids. Anyway, so they're reading it. It's a very funny book. And another vocabulary thing I noticed was the father says when she mentions the elephant she's making up elephants in each story, and so the father says, the little girl says, "Every good story has one." She means an elephant. That's what my teacher said, and the papa replies, "That's ridiculous." And then a few pages later, instead of saying ridiculous, he says that's ludicrous. Well, that's a great word for a little kid to learn, ludicrous. And if you know anything about the history of language, both those come from the Latin. And one means to laugh. The ridiculous comes from the verb rideo, I think, which means to laugh. And ludicrous comes from it's a noun for games or school, but for us, it's sort of a synonym of ridiculous. So you could go off on synonyms. Can you think of more synonyms for that, or just synonyms for other words in the book? That could be a thing you could get into, a little rabbit trail. Or you could try to come up with antonyms. Anyway, so they get to the end, and all the surprises. It's a really cute story. And then Papa at the end says, okay, I'm going to tell you a story that doesn't have any elephants in it. So she says, okay, Papa, I'll draw the pictures. And so she does. And that's another thing that you can do with kids. You can tell a story and they can draw pictures of the story you're telling or the story you're reading. Or they could dictate a story to you and you could draw the pictures or write it down for them. They could dictate it to you. And that's another fun way to learn. A little cartoon. This is almost like a cartoon strip. They could do a cartoon strip of a story you're telling. So anyway, I just thought that there were so many little tangents, little rabbit trails you could go on. There was just a lot that you could mine from this book. And it's so warm, and to me it struck me as funny because she comes home from school and she's confused. She thinks it's the elephant of surprise, and it's the Papa homeschooling her, right? They're having this warm parent-daughter interaction, and he's teaching her. And learning that there's an element of surprise in stories, and it's part of a creative story, is a really valuable thing to know. And they could make up stories where they tried to figure out what element of surprise they were going to put in, or you could model it. You could make up a story and try to come up with an element of surprise. You could brainstorm together. So I just thought, of this one picture book, you could pull so much out in a very casual, warm, fun way that's bonding, and it's not a dry unit study where you have to write out vocabulary words and then, answer questions and that sort of thing. Instead, it's this rich interaction between a parent and their child, enjoying something together and thinking deeply about it. So anyway, that's how I liked To Unschool. This was just a key, vital part of my unschooling. So, all right, so I think I'll stop there. And I'm hoping to make these videos a little bit shorter than this, so I'll try to be more concise. So anyway, I wish you a good night, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.